Good evening. Hello. Welcome. Welcome to Ashburn Art Centre. Has everybody been here before? Anybody never been here before?
Never.
Never? Hands up if you've never been here before. Well, yeah, good for you. Well, welcome along, and welcome to your first Ashburn Art Centre experience. I hope you have many more. We do, since we started in 2018, we're up to about 330, 340 gigs, even for the fact that we've had a year and a half without him. We started. That's fine, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to let you know how much stuff is going on here, and it's hard to let people know about it. You need to have lots of money to advertise and so on. But we have a mailing list, so if you're not on it already, do leave your email with me or go on the website and leave it, because that's the best way to find out what's going on. We have some great things coming up in the next few days. We have, so what day was today? Thursday. Tomorrow night, the film. Once a month there's a film, put a big screen up, and tomorrow night is Nomadland. So yeah, that's something with that. Saturday night we have the Torbay Symphony Orchestra here, which means that most of the space will be the performers, but there are room for about 60 in the audience, and the last time I looked, there were about 20 tickets left. So if they're playing on Saturday, Wagner's Siegfried, Idyll, Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto, and Schumann Symphony No. 4 to finish off. So that is, they sound amazing in here. A whole symphony orchestra in this space is. I've listened to loads of orchestras and played in orchestras, and hearing an orchestra in this space is one of the highlights. It's just so to be. It's about as intimate as you can get with an orchestra, without being in the middle of the violas. So that's on Saturdays. On Sunday night we have an amazing hammered dulcimer player called Max ZT from Brooklyn, New York. Who knows what a hammered dulcimer is? There's a goodly number. There's a very fine local player, Andrew Woodward, who maybe you've seen him. But this guy, his advertising is all talking about him being the Jimi Hendrix of the hammered dulcimer, which, having watched him on YouTube and listened to some of his stuff, maybe giving slightly the wrong impression, because although he is amazing and he's young and he has that kind of flamboyance that Hendrix had, he's not exactly cranking it up and playing it in a kind of electric way. It's very mellow. Well, it's all kinds of things, but it's beautiful anyway. Anyway, he's on Sunday night alongside Dan Whitehouse, who performed here just a few months ago and supporting someone else, and was amazing. Really stupendous singer-songwriter, really interesting stuff. Anyway, that's on Sunday night. And Monday night is our regular blues night. Once a month we have not only, but also the blues. And this week it's featuring a band called Rush Hour and Adam Sweet, great guitarist based up in Exeter, with a really stonking band actually. Local bass player who actually plays with big stars all over the place. So anyway, Monday night there's some great blues on offer, and it goes on into November and December, so do come back and see some more things. Meanwhile, we're here for talk number 2 of our series. Thanks to Alexine for putting these together, and thanks especially to Sean Hellman, who's going to come and talk to us tonight. Sean. One thing I forgot to add, cameras around the place which are live streaming this right now to Zoom and YouTube. If there's anyone, if you feel like you want to invite anyone to join us, send them a message and tell them to email boxoffice@ashburtonarts.org.uk. That's boxoffice@ashburtonarts.org.uk. We'll just go look for Ashburton Arts on YouTube and they'll find us online right now and they can join you.
Cool.
Lovely.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for coming along tonight. I hope you've all got your coats on because it is quite chilly in here actually. I've structured this talk around the year, around the 4 seasons. And I'm going to take you through them with a little bit of what I do, and I'm going to talk about the woodlands, the wood, and some fungi and lichen, etc. So what is green wood or green woodworking? It is sustainable, but that's not the meaning of the word. Green woodworking refers to working with wood that is unseasoned. We cut the tree down, we can use it straight away. And it is the wood is soft and easily worked, and this is one of the reasons why we want to use green wood. And, oh yes, this is, got there before me. These are some of the green wood crafts that are still practiced and have been practiced in the past. There are people certainly doing every one of them. There's no professional shovel makers, wooden shovel makers left anymore. I think there's one person making a few crates at the moment. But the green wood crafts that are very, very popular at the moment are things like spoon making. And it's sort of taken the world by storm, and there are people in every country across the world making spoons, sharing the spoons, selling their spoons, getting excited about spoons. And the other one is pole lathe turning. And a pole lathe, if we can have the next slide, please. This is a pole lathe I'm demonstrating at the Bovey Guild. And it's a very simple device. We've got a treadle at the bottom and a piece of string that is wrapped around our workpiece, which then goes up to a springy pole or a bungee cord. And you press your foot down and it turns the workpiece into the chisel, and you make your cut, you lift your foot up and it returns to the start position. It's a reciprocating lathe, and so we're turning probably about 2/3 of the time. And it is, I will show you in a while just how remarkably quick and fast you can produce work on a pole lathe. And if we can have the next slide, these are some of the bowls that I've turned on the bowl lathe over the years. You can turn practically anything on a pole lathe at all, and some of the biggest bowls I've turned, ones like this sort of size. I know people who turn things an awful lot bigger than this. It is hard work, it is very physical, and it's more of a young man's game rather than someone of my age. And if we could have the next slide, this is another bowl lathe. I've made quite a few for people, especially during COVID. People have been wanting things to do. And I can make them out of any timber, usually timber straight from the forest. And this one is operated by a bungee, and I can set this one up anywhere and turn in any situation. So we're going to start off in the summer, and one of the first shows that I do is the Bodger's Bull, which is an association of pole lathe turners and green woodworkers. And it's 400 people in a field, all with their axes and knives and their tools, all sharing their experience. We have the top professionals, sometimes from around the world, and definitely from the UK. And we have complete amateurs, people who've never done anything, and we all share our knowledge. We don't keep anything secret or withhold anything. We want to spread the word. And we have competitions, and we share, and we party a little bit too long into the night, some of us. And one of the big competitions there is the log to leg race. And this is taking a log of wood, it's usually half a log of wood, and we have to turn a pair of chair legs from it to a set pattern as fast as possible. And this was done by the bodgers of old. It's not a term I particularly like. I prefer pole lathe turners or chair makers or whatever. But these bodgers were in, a lot of them were in High Wycombe, in the Chiltern Hills. With a lot of there was a lot of beech trees around, and most Windsor chairs are made from beech. And they usually worked in teams of 3 in the woods. They would build rudimentary huts in the wood, because they would buy a piece of woodland or the rights to fell the trees in a small piece of woodland every year. So they would be moving round from patch to patch. And they'd build their little huts there and they'd work there all day and often go home at night just turning legs and the spindles for chairs, which they would then sell to the Windsor chair factories, who would then make the Windsor, put the chairs together. And they would sell but they would sell the legs or the turnings by the gross, by the 144. So this was 4 chair legs, 3 stretchers, and maybe 5 or 6 or 7 spindles as well. So that counted as 1 unit, and a cart would come round every now and again and gather them up and take them to the chair factories where they put them together. So this log to leg race is in honour of the bodgers of old. And so we take our log, we split it, we then shave it on the shaving horse here, which I'll come onto later on in the talk, and we put it on our pole lathe, which is here. And you can see me turning here. This is at the APF, the Association of Professional Foresters. We do the International Log to Leg race there. It's rather like the American World Series. It's we do have one chap from Ireland that comes over, and we turn the legs as quickly as possible, and we're judged not only on time but on penalty points as well. So if you make a mistake or it's not an exact replica, that counts as a penalty point, which could be 20 or 30 seconds or so. The length of time it takes me to turn a pair of legs, and this was at this last show about 3 years ago now, it took me 12 minutes to turn a pair of legs. I'm slow. I'm really slow. For me to win, or any chance of winning, I've got to come in at 6 minutes. And that's from the log to that. And it's great fun, and we love it. And one way that you can tell whether your Windsor chair is turned out of green wood, and therefore possibly by one of these old bodgers on the pole lathe, is that if you run your hand around the leg like this, and it feels oval, then it's definitely made out of green wood, because as wood shrinks, it will change shape slightly. And the other way of telling is just looking to see if you can see any tool marks, because with green wood you can't sand it. It's all a tooled finish. So with those 2 things you can identify whether it is done on a pole lathe, and that could be anything from 10 years, well actually there are plenty of people making Windsor chairs these days, but that could possibly be 150 years old, or maybe even older. So some of the other shows I do in the summer is Spoonfest, and again 200-300 people gathered in a field in Edale, all with their knives and axes, just carving spoons. It's really taken off in a very big way. And I've been teaching there ever since it started about 10 years ago, and I just teach sharpening there these days. because sharpening really is a fundamental skill to any craft, and it's something people struggle with so much. And it is really simple. It's just rubbing your tool on a bit of rock, really. Anyone can do it. There's a little bit more to it than that. And there's also Spoonfest as well, which is held in late summer. And again, a whole load of people in a field just turning and carving bowls as well. So one of the questions I get asked very often is about, doesn't your wood shrink and crack? How does it, doesn't it move? Doesn't it fall to bits when you make your furniture? And it doesn't, because essentially, well, actually, I'll explain it this way. If I was to take a branch of wood, a greenwood branch, and I put it on my pole blade and I turn a chair leg, then it would split because of all the annular rings going round and round and round. The outside would dry first. As wood dries, it shrinks and cracks would open up. The centre of the wood would stay wet and large, so cracks would open up. What we're doing, what green woodworkers do, is to take the wood and we split smaller pieces out of a larger log, and it's like making planks. So it all shrinks down into itself. And this chest is something I made with machines. I'm also an electric woodworker, as well as a green woodworker. I made from St Nicholas Church in Exeter. It's a museum, and there's a gentleman I know over in Plymouth in America who makes replica 17th, 18th century furniture. So he will take an oak log, probably about this diameter, up to 3 feet diameter, and he will split it down, and he will split planks out of it, and he will split posts and rails and stiles out of it. He will use his axe to square it off, and then he'll use hand planes to make it into the dimensions that he wants to. He will then cut mortise and tenons at each end and fit these joints together. A mortise and tenon is essentially, the mortise is a hole, the tenon is a sort of a thin stick that fits into the hole. They can be round, they can be square, they can be any shape you want. And then he pegs them in the mortise through the mortise and tenons. So as this piece of wood dries, it shrinks and locks together and is a very stable and very strong piece of furniture. One of the reasons I didn't make it, they wanted 2 chests traditionally, is that I think Peter now charges about £4,000 per chest that he makes, and the museum certainly couldn't afford that. One of the other benefits of, as I've been saying, of green wood is that it shrinks as it dries. And if we go on to the next slide here, something I use this to good effect when I make something called shrink pots or shrink tubs. Now, we've been making shrink pots ever since probably Stone Age, and in this country we probably stopped making them maybe 100 years ago or so. We found examples in Glastonbury Village, we found examples in peat bogs in Ireland as well, actually still full of butter. And what we do is we get a tree trunk, like this, bigger, smaller, whatever, and we make a hole down the middle, and we hollow it out. So we've then got a wall that may be ½ an inch thick all the way down. We then make a little groove around the bottom here, and we put a dry plank in that groove. So this wood is still wet, but the plank is dry. And as it shrinks, as the pot shrinks, it tightens up around the base here. There's no glue at all. It's just being held in there because the walls have shrunk around it. And we used to make all sorts of pots and tubs like this. The biggest ones that I've seen pictures are in Russia and Eastern Europe, and some of them you can fit 6 grown men in. They're really, you've taken a bloody great big tree, they're massive barrels, they're quite amazing. I wouldn't like to be the person who hollowed that out. That's a lot of very hard work. But these are beautiful, beautiful, traditional, ancient pots, which were originally made with either stone or bronze tools. And originally, even so, with some of the books I've written on the archaeology of it, they started off with solid logs, as most of us do these days. I reckon they would have found hollow logs. Why go to all that effort if you've only got stone tools making a hole through end grain through a log? It's hard work, it's difficult, why bother? When I'm walking about, I often see hollow trees. I would select them and use them. Right, okay, excellent. Thank you, Lucy. Most of my wood is cut in the winter, and we're in the summer, and I'm using this wood up, and some of it's slowly drying out. Green woodwork can still apply to wood that is more or less dry as well. It's more about the techniques and processes that we use. And I'd just like to talk a little bit about the structure of wood as well, so you can understand some of the principles. Okay, this is my log, my branch. This is a load of willow bound together. Think of it as a bundle of straws. The straws in the middle are dead. They're inert wood, but they still hold moisture. It's only the cambrial layer and the sapwood that has any life in it. So it's a bundle of straws, and I try and cut the tree down, cut across the tree, and it's hard work. I need a very sharp tool in order to make a V in and to cut it across, or I need to use a saw. But if I was to get an axe or a wedge, I can split it down here very easily. The fibres holding these longitudinal tubes together aren't that strong. So I can split or rive or cleave wood very easily. And this is how we use our wood all the time. It's one of the properties of it. Where am I? Okay, so if I was to cut a little disc off the end here, and I've got some examples here, like this, and I've had plenty of people who've just had trees cut down, big trees cut down in their gardens, saying, oh, can you make me a table, a coffee table out of this, or can you make me some stools out of this? And I say, well, actually, no, the wood is very green. There's no strength here. The grain is really, really short. And I can break it just like that. And it's likely to shrink as it dries out, shrink and crack. So what I really need, and as you can see that this little plank here, which is either split or sawn out along the grain, is probably about the third thickness of this. And I can carry it all day trying to beat it and break it like that. I really have to put a lot of effort into trying to break it. This is where the strength of the wood is, and we use this within the furniture and with whatever we're doing within green woodwork. And this is a piece of ash, and I can make lovely bows out of it. It really is very springy and will spring back. And I just want to show you another example. Let me just check where I am. Right, so that piece of ash is a long grain. I actually forgot that. Okay. And then, for example, let's say this is my axe handle. like this. The grain is running along the whole length. And I've drawn a line to show you where the grain is here. I can get my axe and I can hit it very, very hard and it won't break. I've forgotten to bring. Actually, let's see if I can put this in the vise. Okay, I can carry on hitting this and it's not going to break. It's got a real strength to it. This one has got cross grain in it, and you can hopefully you can see these lines going across here. So the grain isn't parallel to the length of the stick. So if I do the same with that, and I really don't have to hit it very hard, it breaks. And again, this is one of the great benefits of green woodwork. I make my own axe handles out of ash. I split it out of a long length of wood, and I axe and shave it down. You may have experienced this if you chop firewood at home, get an axe, you're whapping away, chopping up all your firewood, you have a few mishits, and then your axe splits, or your handle splits along the grain, the short grain like this. That's because it's been sawn out of a plank of wood where the grain isn't going along the length of the handle. So I just wanted to explain that a little bit. And I think there's one. Oh yes. And again, I've got a couple of sticks here to give you that, to show you some more examples. Okay, this is seasoned wood. This is a bit of seasoned willow. It just snaps. It's dry. But when wood is green, I can bend and bend and bend it, and I can bend this right round. And if I was really, I have to put this in the vise. Normally I'd stand on this. I can actually use bend this to great use. When I'm making, well, I actually don't make hazel hurdles, but people make hazel hurdles. Again, use this long grain, and they twist. You hear that, and can you see that? How the grain is breaking along here. So I'm just breaking the connection between the fibres of the long straws, or the long fibres on the wood, but the fibres themselves don't break. So I can carry on twisting this and twisting this and twisting this, and I can then, if I was making hazel hurdles, I can turn this round the end of the zales, or stiles, as they call them, the uprights. So I'm locking the hazel hurdle together. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of one. Also, people who harvest willow use this technique to make knots to bind their willow together. So they don't use string, they're just using what they have to hand to make a knot. And if I was using a thinner piece, I can just get a stick from a tree, a twig from a tree, and I can bundle up whatever I have. And we can't do that with dry wood, as you saw, it just snapped. Right, okay, I think we're on to some more big hitty axey stuff now. Okay, so let's get down to the basics. I've got my log here. I've got a feeling this may be a little bit dry. It feels a bit dry. It's got a bit of moisture in. It's a piece of cherry, and cherry has a very stiff bark. I was hoping to grab a piece of wood that would just fly in half as soon as I hit it with an axe. This probably won't. And I was, yes. So our main tool for green woodworkers, all green woodworkers, is the axe is the main tool. And I can do practically anything with, if I've just got an axe, if I was ever on that desert island, it would be the axe that I would want. Not a knife, not any other tool, just give me an axe and I'm happy. and I can place the axe on top of the log, get a couple of gentle hits, just to make sure it's going to split where I want to. Sorry. And the wood splits in half along the grain. I can't cut it very easily across the grain at all. I would have to make little V cuts to actually cut through. So our axe is the most important tool, and they need to be really, really sharp. It's no good having blunt tools at all. And just to show you how sharp it is, it cuts through paper with ease. It's not as sharp as it could be. It doesn't need to be that much sharper because it is a percussion tool. I am hitting the wood with it, but it does need to be most of the time sharp enough to be able to roughly cut paper anyway without tearing. And I'd just like to say a little bit about sharpening and axe safety and safety when it comes to using these tools. A lot of people are terrified about the axe, and obviously it's if you misplace the axe, it can be with dire consequences. And we need to learn to sharpen our tools properly, and action sharp tools are far safer because we don't get tired so quickly. And if you do have an accident, God forbid, it is easier to repair that than if it was blunt. But there is no need. There's no reason for you to cut yourself at all, ever. If you want to get into green woodworking and using these tools, do get a little bit of training first. It's really important. And one of the things that I tell everyone is essentially we're athletes. We're athletes without the sports therapies and the masseuses and stuff like this. And we don't look after our body, where most of us are not taught anything about how to use our body when we're working with these tools. And we're manual workers. We are just the same as any athlete. We're using our body to do something repetitively every day. And just a couple of quick little tips is that with any sharp tools, we want a good base. So let's bring in the martial arts and lower our centre of gravity, have a nice balanced base, rather than working like that with a bent back out there and our arms outstretched. That's just ridiculous, and you're going to hurt yourself. So nice little base. Get down like that. You don't need to hold your axe right at the end. You can hold it, you can choke it right up. You've got more control that way. We bring our elbows right into our body, and we just let the axe drop or fall. I'm just throwing, as it were, throwing my axe into the wood. And I'm not wildly going at it like this at all. I wouldn't want to hit that bit of wood holding the axe this far down the handle. I haven't got enough control. There are all sorts of things. I could go on and sort of lecture about usage and safety and RSI for hours on end. I think it's very important, and I think it's a very necessary thing to teach anyone using these tools. I'm just going to split another piece of wood out. And as you can see, I'm not going to help for leather. Everything is controlled. I'm always in control of what I'm doing. And here's a little tip of when you're cutting kindling, for example. I don't advise you to cut kindling with a very sharp axe. Use a blunter axe. And don't hit the wood like that. We want to be controlled. Oh, I need a drink. I've got a frog in the throat. So if I want to split this piece of wood exactly in a particular position, so I lay the axe on the wood and I just gently tip down. Do note that my fingers are not in line with that split there. I'm not holding that piece of wood like this. Very important. Right, I've embedded the axe into the wood and now I hit it harder. And you notice I take my hand away, just in case. I don't know when exactly the wood will split. If I'm using a piece of wood or a species of tree I've not used before, it can suddenly just go. So I've got to be very careful. But a lot of it comes with experience as well. We know, we get used to our woods, we just can read the wood and we know exactly how it's going to work, but there are always surprises. It's a natural material, so don't get complacent. Right, I'm going to make a little plank out of this small billet of wood, and I'm axing down the grain here like this, and I'm only taking thin shavings off. And just notice how close my arms are into my body. I'm really controlled. I'm not actually lifting that axe too far up. And this, I could be making a beam out of a log that is 20 foot long and 12 inches by 12 inches. Or I could be making this small billet of wood like I am here. If I'm hewing a beam, I would be using the axe across the grain like this, and you can see that it's just rolling out. It's really easy. And I have to put a little bit more effort in cutting down the grain like this. So I'm making a small billet of wood. I'm going to take this over and tidy it up.
Is that side axe or is it sharp on both sides?
It's got a bevel on both sides, yes. If I was hewing beams, I would potentially use a side axe, but for all the green woodworking, most of the green woodworking, I would have a bevel either side. If you want to find out more about that, I've written a little pamphlet about sharpening with lots of information about all the bevels and grinds and all the technical stuff. So,
Is this just the 25-pound?
yes, the one that weighs 1.8 kilos, yeah. It just got bigger and bigger and bigger. I just had to include the next thing to make it complete. Right. Okay. Oh, yes. Yes. Okay. It's a good job I've got this little crib sheet here, because I would have jumped on. So we can make our beams and our planks by splitting and sawing the wood out. But most of the time, ever since sort of Roman or just pre-Roman times, we started making saws. And the Vikings as well, and sawing our wood out. They were very, very expensive items. And not only do you need to know how to work steel really well, you need to know how to make files in order to sharpen and cut the teeth of the saws. And we can we can use saws to make planks and cut our wood up. It is quite a lot of work. And if you're sawing very big planks, it's very often easier, or beams, it's very often easier just to axe it out rather than saw it. But my wife and I had the privilege of going up into Sharpen, up into the home of the lecture peoples, right up into the top of Sharpen. And as we were walking up to a monastery, we spotted these sawyers on the hillside. Saying a hillside is a little bit of an understatement. Everywhere in Sikkim it's just like that. It's the foothills of the Himalayas. And they make a little platform, and they roll the log onto this platform, and they use a saw that is possibly about 7 or 8 foot long to saw the wood up. If you'd like to go on to the next photo. And as you can see here, you've got the top dog, who's a young lad, and probably the master below, who's known as the bottom dog. And they're using this saw to saw the wood. It's fast-growing teak that grows on the hillside. It's only about 20 years old. These trees are only about 20 years old, so they're very, very fast-growing. If we go on to the next video, and if you play this, look at his hands. If you can see, watch his hands. That's a really important bit that I want to show you here. Okay, you see he's stopped. Hopefully you've caught that. And this is something that I tell every one of my students all the time. It's something I sort of knew beforehand, but that really, really condensed it for me. Not only are they going very slow, they're going out for an afternoon constitutional Sunday walk, really. They're not rushing. You give a saw to a Western man, and they go hell for leather. And they either buckle the saw or run out of energy, or get the saw stuck in the wood. They're there for 2-3 weeks at a time. They're sleeping under little shelters. They can't rush. They're doing this for a living. And as he saw, every time he pulled the saw up like that, his hands went like that. Okay, when we're learning to use the axe, and I see this all the time, we grab the axe so hard that our knuckles are glowing white. And we're going to really damage our hands that way, and we're going to damage them really quite quickly. You may recover really quickly when you're young, but you start doing this for 10, 20 years, and then sort of 30 years later, then actually you can't use your hands anymore. It's really important, and everything. And the other thing you may have seen about them is that they were really graceful as well. Anyone good at their craft has a real grace to them, a real flow. And that's how you can tell anyone whether they're good at something or not, whether they flow or not. And we've got to learn to relax, and at first it's really hard to learn to relax. And every time after I've made my stroke, I relax. I just relax my fingers. It's hardly perceptible, but I am relaxing every time. And that's really, really important, and something I bang on about all the time. So I'm going to introduce you. Oh, actually, no, good job, I've got this as well. Let's go back here. For, the other thing that people get really confused about is going against the grain and going with the grain. When we're using a knife and we're cutting our wood, sometimes it really flows very easily, and sometimes it's really hard work. And you sort of kind of force the knife through and nothing's happening. So think of the grain of the wood when you're cutting it, or planing it, or working it with any edge tool. That if you stroke a dog from head to tail, it's lovely and smooth. It's all really silky, unless they've been rolling in the mud. If we rub the dog's fur from tail to head, we push the fur over the other way, the hair over the other way. It's rough. There's a lot of resistance. And again, I'm going to give you an example here. This has been cut at an angle, 45-degree angle. Rubbing my hand down there, it's really smooth. Coming this way, ow, 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 all these bits are sharp, ow, and there's lots of resistance. And if I was using a knife, potentially, if I'm cutting that way, the knife will get pulled into the grain and split the piece of wood. Actually, that's very unlikely unless it's a very small piece of wood because the resistance is so great but we will get a really bad finish and we will tire ourselves out very quickly. So that's the difference between going with the grain and going against the grain. And as soon as you start working with wood, it's a really important concept to understand. Right, I'm going to introduce you to my shaving horse. It's probably one of my favourite tools. So I wrote a book about it. 13 different designs of wood holding devices used in green woodwork and all various different crafts, including hoop makers, shaving devices. They're making hoops maybe 8 foot long, so it's a long. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture. Have a look in the book at the break. And I wanted an adjustable shaving horse because all the shaving horses I'd used previously, I was bent over like that and I was doing that, and it was just not working for my body at all. So depending on what I'm doing, I need to work at various heights. And I did something that quite amazed me. I came up with a completely new design that no one had thought of before. And this is adjustable up and down like that. And so I can sit on my shaving horse. I call this the Easy Rider. And as you can see, it's sort of it's the shaving horse for the bodger in the midlife crisis. It's a damn sight cheaper than a Harley Davidson or a Porsche. So a shaving horse is just a quick and release device. It's a beautifully simple tool and probably goes back maybe a couple of thousand years. We don't know. It rots. It gets put on the fire. You know, there is not much evidence for them. But we certainly know, I forgot to mention this earlier, that the pole lathe certainly goes back to 2000 BCE, 4,000 years ago, on Dartmoor. We know probably that someone was turning because we found in one of the cysts, is it White Hill cyst? We found a couple of earplugs, leverettes, for putting in the ears, and they were turned out of native woods. And so they were turned on a pole lathe of some sort. It's exactly the same principle. It may not have looked quite like the ones I showed you earlier. So again, this is a simple clamping device. And the great thing about this is the lever advantage. So what's the distance here between the pivot point and here is that. And what's that, 8 inches or so, times 1, 2, 3. It's a 3-time lever advantage. So if I was to put my hand in here and press it, I'd crack my bones. And the other reason that we use shaving horses is if I use a device like this, I'll be spending all my time doing this. And I turn my wood around constantly. So I put my wood in, I use my draw knife, it's just a 2-handled knife, and I pull it towards myself and shave the wood. And I can get incredible finishes on the wood. I do particularly like a tooled finish, and as I mentioned earlier, we can't use sandpaper on green wood, but I know that if you're using making spoons and stuff, the wood does dry out very quickly. It doesn't actually smell very much. Some woods have incredible smells to them. Cherry can smells a bit like almonds at times. So you can see how quickly I shave this. And actually, is everyone comfortable for me to pass this round or not? Have a feel of it. Are you able to catch or just have a quick feel? Feel the top surface. Just feel how silky smooth that is. That's the equivalent of using 2000 grit sandpaper or abrasive paper. Right, I'd just like to show you the benefit of working or cutting with the grain, or the long grain, along the grain again. And I'm going to make a little flower, wooden flower. And it's the travelling folks who used to make these. They didn't use a shaving horse. They just used a penknife or a knife. A knife often was made from a bone-handled cutlery knife that they'd sharpened up and maybe put a point on the end. And they put their knife on their knee like this, and they drew the wood over the knife. And they'd use elder, which has a big, pithy centre. And they make these great big huge chrysanthemums. Oh, a bit like those up there. And the men would make them, and the women would go round house to house selling them. And I've met many a lady, older lady, who would say, oh wow, I haven't seen them in years since I was a kid. And they remember the travelling folk coming around their houses and selling flowers, often dyed in food colouring, to the lady of the house. And they'd come every year because they worked the land. They would go hop picking, apple picking, turnip picking, or whatever, and they'd have a route. And as they travelled, they'd just take wood out of the hedgerows and whittle it into flowers. They'd also use hazel and willow to make tent pegs as well. And not tent pegs, they're clothes pegs. And clothes pegs are amazing, or the travelling folk ones are amazing. You use an old, let's say, a drinks can, aluminium drinks can, just to put a bind around the top, one little tack, and then they split the wood down the middle and make a few cuts, and there you go. You've got a clothes peg, and I've made a few myself. I don't have any examples here, but they're wonderful. They work so well. And again, we've just lost so many people off the land. People who don't know about these crafts, and lots of people could be making part of a living or supplementing their living just by using wood from the hedgerows. Right, so I've just made a little flower like this, and you can see that I can bend the petals, I can move them around. They're strong, they've got real strength to them. So that's just shaving with the grain. And if I was to get my little drill, I can put a little hole in the bottom. If I was using elder, I'd just point a little stick or an awl up there, and then that's it. I don't have to use a drill. I've got a little stick here somewhere, or I had a little stick, there it is. Let's just cut the end off. Who did I get? And there you go. It does actually smell a little bit of willow, actually. But yes, that's your little wooden flower that the travelling folk used to make, and they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and they're wonderful little things. Right, where's that little bit of wood that I was... Oh, it's out there somewhere. Where did it get to? Right, Kes, could I have it back, please? Right, did you feel how smooth that was? That was just awesome. And that's just from my knife. And I've made a load of spatulas down there. And again, no sandpaper, it's just a cut finish. And I really enjoy not using sandpaper. I hate sanding, I hate the dust, I hate the process. It's just not for me, and I really enjoy a tall finish. It's just tactile, it just feels wonderful. Right, I'm just going to come forward a little bit here. Right, I'm going to show you what cross-cutting is. I need to make a couple of cuts across this piece of wood here. I could use a knife and score it, but that's going to take me so long to do. So I use a saw, and it's sort of lots of little points, lots of little knives basically that cut across the grain. Across the grain like this. And then I can get to my chisel, and I can sort of, this is the same as hewing, cut across the grain, like so. And I can put a little groove in here with this chisel here. And instead of just pushing, this is a little gouge. You see that there. Not very well. It's just a little U-shaped cutting edge. I'm not pushing straight across. What I'm doing is slicing the wood by tipping it from side to side. Oops, I'm just obscuring the video there. There we go. And it cuts. And I will do the same on the other side, but I'll just quickly come over here. I'm going to be doing this a little bit Blue Peter fashion. I give a lot of talks to wood turning clubs and wood carving clubs, and I make a whole fan bird and talk about the process and the tools and the techniques during an hour and a half or so. But I'm sure you don't want to be sitting here just watching me doing mundane stuff, so I can shape it even more with the draw knife. And so in great Blue Peter fashion, you can see that. I have prepared, if we can have the next slide, I've got to that stage there. You can see that little billet of wood, so I've got this shape. What I'm doing here is making a little fan bird. And this here is the shape of the feathers. So the next step is I've got to split 60 little planks of wood out of this, 60 feathers. Sometimes I split more, sometimes I split less. So I use this little two-handed push knife here. And I'll put it on top of the wood. Yeah, that's a camera, that's better, isn't it? Okay, you can see, can you all see that a bit better? And I just push down. And what I'm doing is splitting those fibres like I split this big log here with the axe, or like you split your firewood. It's exactly the same. It's just a little bit more controlled. And I carry on, and I carry on, and I go all the way to the end, and you can, actually, a sod's law, isn't it? I usually say it should be this, this surface is a little bit rough. It is, you can actually feel it, and it is a split surface. Sometimes it does, I think, quite get the grain right, and it is a little bit more of a cut than a split surface. But I've got to get them as thin as possible. And so, Lucy, if we can get the next photo. Right, I'm cleaving or riving the feathers there, and you can see sort of the corrugation, the little grooves, that's indicative of it being actually split rather than cut. And if we can have the next slide. No, that was the previous one. Okay, all the feathers are rived out there, or split out, or cleft out. Cleft, splitting, riving, they're all essentially the same things. And where are we? I should have one. Oh, I actually don't, do I? Well, I've messed up this great Blue Peter. Here's one I prepared earlier, bit, haven't I? Right, I think lost the others again. Oh, well, on here. Right, I'll hide that. Hold it up like that. Okay, so they're all split out like that, all consistent size and thickness. So the next thing I need to do is, if we can have the next slide, is to cut the bird's body out. And again, the easiest way of doing that, especially I like these more complex curves. Personally, I could just use my draw knife or my axe or my knife to shape it, but it takes a bit longer, so I use this little frame saw here. And this is a coping saw blade and bits that I took off the coping saw, which is just a metal frame saw. It's just not strong enough. And I need some real strength there so the blade doesn't bend. Whereas on a metal one, it'll bend a lot. And I can just saw round and saw the bird's body out. Okay. And again, a great Blue Peter fashion. Ta-ra! I've sawn the bird's body out. But I would like to take you back to Sikkim as well, and to Gangtok and the Handicraft Centre in Gangtok. And if you play this video, you see, okay, that's a piece of bamboo. And believe it or not, that's a bit of wire taken from a whole bunch of them that was tensioning telegraph poles. And he's made teeth in this bit of wire, and he's cutting out all these little shapes on the carving that he's doing. And that will end in a minute, and the next video will play. And if you're a fine furniture maker, please look away now. It's a hand plane that he's using to make the teeth in this wire. He's just hitting the sharp edge of the plane blade into the wire. And that's the carvings that they do. They're very traditional carvings. You see a lot of them in the monasteries up there as well. And it's absolutely incredible. But unfortunately, I didn't edit the video quite soon enough. So I came home and I tried it. I didn't try it out myself. And it works. I made a bit that I put in this little saw, and it works perfectly. Unfortunately, I was using it on ash and oak, and sort of about 8 mil thick or so. And the teeth went blunt quite quickly. Dry ash and oak is incredibly hard. This is really fast-grown teak that they were using over there. There's a softness and ease of cutting to it. And that's one thing I really love about India and many developing countries. They are so inventive in what they do and what they use. And it's a constant reminder just to me, is just keep it simple. You don't need to complicate things too much. Okay. I've run out of paper now. And I think it's time for a break. So we've come to the end of summer, and we're going to go, after the break, we're going to go into autumn, and then winter and spring. And it's all going to speed up a little bit more.
Thank you very much. I just need to let everyone know before that soup and rolls are available now as advertised, and if you'd like to take your way down out of that door down in the East Gallery, you can get some on the way. If there's a big queue, then just keep on going out the door at the front and around to the front and back in the other door and come back in. If there's no queue, you can just turn around and come back again. But yeah, if there's plenty of people waiting behind you, just keep on going one-way fashion. We'll come over and have a look at some of Sean's work.
Oh yes, or have a little chat if you want.
So, back in 10-15 minutes.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
The bar is open as well.
What trade is it?
We'll find out. Yeah, it's coming. We will. It's lovely. You can have a look at whatever you want. But if you touch, you can buy.
Yes, and then I'll go to that day.
Yes, right, okay. I remember your face, I remember your name. Come into workshops. So yeah, seeing about there's a familiarity there. Yes.
Hi, Ram.
Thank you.
Winter vegetables.
Yes. Roots and dog vomit. Sorry. There's a dog vomit fungus. That looks just like dog vomit, isn't it? I think it's a slime mold rather than true fungi, which is a rather similar illness. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
He says no, but he says
Do get some training with whoever and wherever. But it really is very important. And safety is really important. You'll benefit so much from it. And Wednesday afternoons, I run afternoon class in Woodworking and Tenon.
I know,
What to do. Yeah, that's my workshop last week. Yeah. So if that's an interest, give us a shout.
Is that your display?
Yes, I've got plenty of copies.
Could you put my name down? And you want cash? Well, I could pay through the artist.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll sort that out. Okay. You want one of the rarest birds out at Chestnut. I will get you a box and I will get you a little leaflet as well. So you can magic beans. Well, they've got to be properly magic. Cash will come.
Right. Well, is that?
Oh yes, I've got the signature. I do take it right to
It is like a traditional craft.
unless otherwise promised. So that is huge, that has been baked in the oven. Is
So
it
we
true?
don't really mean.
You didn't do
No.
it.
Oh, I suppose I got it. Doesn't it?
Don't do the flexion depending on which.
Is that a really special Is that the same thing?
It's a, you know, but you know, it's
And there's some amazing stuff being done, research being done with fungi. There's not time to go into it here. I could show you loads more pictures. And let's go on to the other. Yes, Charlie, you wouldn't want to eat this.
No.
And that probably would be quite nasty. You wouldn't like. This is Dyer's maizegill, or Dyer's polypore. And it's amazing fungi. It's just look at it. It's quite big as well. It was sort of quite a shock when we came across it. And my wife Lucy, she's a dyer as well. That's the colour it produces when you dye wool with it, which is just so lovely. And there's all sorts of other mushrooms, other fungi that you can dye with as well. You have to talk to her. I don't have enough experience of this to go through them. My interest lies more in either eating the fungi or chopping trees down and making stuff into them. So you got, all right, we're on to lichens now, which are amazing. Again, it's my wife who got me into the lichens. I've always looked at them. I've always been fascinated by them. And I've recently got hold of a stereo microscope, so I can get right in there, really right deep in there. And I'm amazed, it's a whole different world. Get a microscope, it's amazing. And there are all sorts of lichen mites and fungi mites, all sorts of invertebrates, all sorts of things living in there. And when you're looking at it through the microscope, you see this great big thing wandering across your field of vision, and you jump out of their skin. It's a big monster. And it brought it home to me, you know, these trees are life to so many organisms. And we cut them down and we may burn all the branches on the fire. We're committing ecocide on a massive scale. One tree, on the fire straight away. Absolutely appalling, gutting. It's always best to leave your wood and try and dissuade anything that's living on it. Before you actually just don't burn it on the bonfire, really. There's no need to have big bonfires and burning your wood. It's far better just to leave it there as dead hedges. That's going to benefit everything. And a lot of modern tree management does do that and then encourage leaving dead wood. Dead wood is vitally important as well as veteran trees, but that's a whole different subject that I can go on for a long time. So this, again, is a map lichen. It's a cross lichen, and you can see it's just the same as a sweeted wood. You get all these interaction zones, these black lines, and they're butting up against each other and fighting for territory, as it were. And if we go on to the next one, I have to just say very briefly that there are a lot of medicinal properties of lichen as well. Some of them are strongly antibiotic and have other health-giving properties. This is Pulmonaria lungwort. It's on the red list. And living in the Atlantic forest as we do here, we're really blessed with a lot of lichen that we don't have in other parts of the drier parts of the country. This to me is the green man, and I'm sure it wasn't always originally oak trees coming out of the mouth and nostrils of the green man. It would have been Pulmonaria or lungwort. And as a little side note, we have got there are two sites I know where this lichen is. One is in Yarna, and the other one is just up the road in Buckland in the moor. Just on turning on the right at the top of the hill, there are a load of ash trees. We've just heard that these ash trees were going to be felled because of ash dieback, and people got onto the authorities and DNP, and they've got a stay of execution for 2 or 3 years before they're cut down. And the Lichen Society is going to be transplanting this Pulmonaria because it is on the red list. It is going extinct, basically, as are quite a few fungi and lots of other stuff, unfortunately. Right, okay, now on to the next slide, and this is where I'll start showing you a little bit more. This, unfortunately, is a common sight in many woodlands, plastic tree guards. We encase our trees in plastic at the beginning of the life. At the end of the life, we encase the wood in plastic again. We go and buy bags of logs in plastic bags or plastic nets, or they're delivered in great big dumpy bags as well, and very often single-use plastic. And there's not much need to do this, which takes me on immediately to the alternatives. Don't buy a bag of kindling in plastic. Oh, by the way, lichens. I forgot to mention one very important one. Again, this is like dye from lichens, Oculecchia, makes amazing purples. And you may have been told that purple was just for the royals, it was so expensive, it was so rare. Rubbish. Everyone had access to purple dyes. It's extracted by ringing on the lichen and leaving it to ferment for 6 months or so, and then you can dye your wall with that. Throughout history, urine has played a huge part in our society and our industrial society as well. Right, I'd like to introduce you to my pimp. And a pimp is made up of 25 faggots. And a faggot is something that you put on the fire to light your fire with. All you need is half a sheet of newspaper, if that, light it and whoosh, off it goes. It's made up of silver birch twigs and a few hazel sticks as well. And it is very traditional, and they were made in huge quantities, not only for all the big houses. Petworth House still uses pimps and faggots to light all its fires. They were used to light forges, industrial processes, your home fire as well. And it's one of the many coppice crafts or products from the coppice industry that people would have made a living from and can still make a living from. This today is just waste wood. It's usually just burnt, or just left there to rot. We could be using it. We can use every single part of the tree, and we don't. No plastic used whatsoever. One using material that would be normally discarded, bound up with baler twine, which is usually jute or sisal. Actually, I think it's sisal. I've also started making pimps with the shavings from the shaving horse. I don't quite have enough shavings. I've used willow, bundles of willow like this. This is absolutely just riddled with woodworm, even that size. I can bundle that up, and I have done, with just sticks or whatever. And it's a great eco alternative to your firelighters, which we really don't need to use. And I went on, this is just the beginning of a project that I'd like to sort of get more into and see if I can work with other people, is we don't need to encase everything in plastic. We're addicted to it, and we don't need to be. This is sort of a, it's just using I use a pimp clamp to make these pimps. It's just a cradle with a little handle to tension everything up. I put my firewood in my pimp cradle. I include a couple of faggots in there as well, or sticks of kindling as well. It's just bound together. Again, it's quite heavy, with baler twine. And we've got to start thinking about how we are going to not use plastic, but still make everything accessible to people. So hopefully I will do more work and try and team up with some more people to actually find processes to make that more competitive and able to use within the commercial industries. And forestry these days is essentially great big machines ploughing through the land, going chomp, chomp, chomp. Firewood processors have all these saws and processors and conveyor belts, and it's sort of fed in one end and it all comes out in plastic in the other end, and we've got to wean ourselves off that. So this leads me into coppice rotation quite easily, and it's something that's really dying, or it is dying, it is dying out. We need to revive our coppice woodlands. We've also got to revive our hedgerows as well. And basically, the magic thing about trees, hardwood trees, you cut them down, they grow again. You cut them down, they grow up again. And each time you cut them down, they grow with more vigour. So you get some hazel for making hazel hurdles, for example. You cut your one little stem after, 4 or 5 years or so, and you get, 4 or 5 stems coming up. Not a lot, you wait 8 years, you cut that down. You then get 20 or 30 stems coming up. You cut that down. You wait a few more decades, and you can get 60 or 80 rods from one stall. And this stall will go on for centuries. There is a stall of a small leaf lime, I think, up at Western Bay. It's probably the size of this room, if not bigger. And it's been coppiced regularly. And it is probably, I can't remember off the top of my head, it is at least 800 years old. It may be a lot older. And lime doesn't live that long. Our longest lived trees in this country are oak, and we're looking at about 800-900 years old. And if you want to see big old, and these are massive old oak trees go up to Windsor Great Park, it is absolutely mind-blowing. It's well worth the trek to find these veteran, ancient trees that go back so many generations. And it's very moving. With birch, for example, with these pimps, birch is a lovely wood. I love working it. And birch is a coloniser. It just comes in there and grows everywhere. You've got to thin it out, and we can use it for kindling. We can use it for horse jumping fences, steeple traces, and stuff like that. I much prefer to use it as firewood. We can use, for example, chestnut. And in the southeast, where I used to live many years ago, there was a lot of overgrown chestnut coppice. Wonderful wood, doesn't rot. Well, it does, all wood rots eventually, but it takes a long time. Like oak, it takes a very long time to rot. And you can make fence posts out of chestnut. And you may have noticed on Dartmoor, there are more and more chestnut fence posts up there. Because most fence posts are made from a tannelised pine. And tannelisation is a pressure treatment of injecting poisonous chemicals. It used to be some really nasty chemicals like copper sulphate and I can't remember the other ones, but highly poisonous. Arsenic, that's the one, yeah. Copper chromate, yeah. Which just leach out into the land. And again, Dartmoor, XSSI, you don't want chemicals leaching out into the land. And just to give you an example, my parents moved to Wales in 1976. The land was fenced with mainly oak fence posts, some sawn, some cleft or split out. And my dad replaced a lot of them with tannelised fence posts. And I've seen some of them rot out in 8 years, which is ridiculous. And that rot, where do those chemicals go? They go into the land, into the ecosystem, into the waters, and eventually back into everyone here. What are we doing? And yet, I still go back to visit my dad, and there's still some original oak fence posts there. We're talking, must be 80 years or so for some of these fence posts are still standing. So why not use these sustainable timbers that we can grow on a coppice rotation, employ people to work them, people are making a living, and it is sustainable and green. And the next thing is hedgerows. Why are we cutting our hedgerows down? You may have noticed a few little coat hooks there. There's plenty of wood in hedgerows that we can use for making stuff. Small scale employment for individuals. We can turn a lot of it into fence posts, into firewood rather. We can use it for making faggots, especially the smaller stuff, for shoring up riverbanks and to stop erosion. And I know people, local woodsmen, local hedge layers, they're doing just that with all their waste wood. They make faggots, they make an extra income from it. And we've got to think in this greater, wider way of how can we use this wood. It's not just there just to be burnt on big bonfires. And every farm would have used the wood in some form or other, anyway, from their hedgerows. And a lot of farms would have had small coppice areas and small woodlands that they would have harvested every few years or so. I've got a friend, Ben Law, down in Surrey. I used to live down there. It was just when he bought his coppice woodland, started living on his land, and then built his house for Brand Designs, the best house building program on there, so everyone says. He is now eventually got round and completed a whole coppice rotation. And with the chestnut, it can be anything from 8 years, which would give you something like that, to 20 years or so, depending on the land and the aspect of anything like that to that. And you can build with it, instead of taking big trees and sawing them up and wasting lots of wood and lots of fuel transporting them all over the place. And so most coppice workers on established coppice, they just go around in a big circle, and they've always got the material there. Next year they do a little bit more, and eventually they get round to the beginning again. So this sort of ends the winter and our beginning of lighting our fires and stuff. And if you can go back, actually, that's it. Thank you, Lucy. I used to be a photographer. I've done a lot of tree photography and stuff, and that's one of the cards I've got there. You may have noticed them down there. There's not a lot to say about winter. We're harvesting our wood. We're burning our wood. We're making in the dim candle light of our little cottages. And we're just waiting for spring, and we're hoping that we'll survive the winter and not use up all our reserves. And yeah, that's all I've got to say about the winter with the woodwork. And we come to spring, amazing time. And again, we come back to birch. I do love birch trees. They're not long lived, 60 years on average, 80 maybe. Yeah, there's some big ones on Dartmoor, massive ones on Dartmoor that are fantastic. Lovely wood to work with. It works really well, very underrated, this timber. Its bark is amazing. You can, in America, you can strip off sheets of bark, what about that? Well, actually even wider than that, by 10 foot long. And it's really durable. You can make birch bark canoes out of it. Unfortunately, over in this country, if you can go back one, Lucy, that would be great. It all crinkles up, all the bark gets all wobbly like this at the bottom, and we can get bits of birch bark off, but not much. And we've tapped birch trees before and got the sap, and this is a common practice. I think it just tastes like water. It's meant to be very good for you, and there's an industry of people tapping birches and selling the sap for vast amounts of money, or making wine out of it on quite a number of occasions. Right, if we go to the next photo now, right, I took a gallon of birch sap and I boiled it down. It got smaller and smaller. I didn't put it in a smaller saucepan, which I should have done. So I slightly burnt it. So that's what I got out of a gallon. It's not worth doing, really. It does taste nice, but it's about 100 to 1 reduction. Whereas maple syrup is 40 to 1. And in the spring in America, you get whole woodlands with all these pipes all feeding into these troughs over all these bonfires, boiling down all this sap to make maple syrup. So it's not really worth doing in this country. But if you do it, do make sure you plug up the tree afterwards, because the sap does come out by the gallon per day when you catch it just right. And usually we don't use wood cut in the spring because it rots quicker, it gets more likely to be attacked by insects. You've got all the sugars being active in the sapwood. But we can take the bark off very, very, very easily, actually. You get a piece of willow, or sycamore even, you cut the bark down, and you can actually get your fingers in there and you can just peel the bark away. That's because the tree is just beginning to lay down new cells, and it's very slippery. There's no grip there at all, whereas in winter it really grips on as a defence against animals eating it. So I've got a friend, a contemporary up in Cumbria, Owen Jones, and again Owen Jones is on the red list as well, unfortunately. He's a oak swill basket maker, and there are only a few people in the country actually doing it for a living. Him and an ex-apprentice of him, which I hope he's still doing. I haven't met her. But he's a coppice worker. He coppices oak, and these are made from oak. And he will peel the bark off in the spring, and he'll dry it out, and he'll sell it to a local tannery in Collerton, Bakers and Son. And they use it for making traditional oak tanned leather. And again, I think there's only one such tannery left in the country, and that's just down the road near Axminster. And he will use these small bits of oak, which are about sort of that diameter or so, and it's mainly sapwood, and these are made out of the sapwood of oak. He boils them up, and he splits them down, and he makes these oak swills like this. These are industrial baskets. There's nothing delicate about them at all. And I can stand on them quite happily. Hopefully I won't fall off. And they were often used for gathering stones in the fields, moving pig iron, moving coal, moving vegetables and all sorts. They were the common basket for industrial use. As was this Devon split basket here, made in a different style. This was one of the last ones that Jack made before he died. Luckily, we've got John Williamson up on Dartmoor making them again, and he's doing a fantastic job. So, where did I get to with this bird? It's not got to finish it, haven't I? This is a bit naughty of me. I've actually just lost that. It's here. Yes, I can never see the wood through the trees, actually. It's very common. I put something down in the workshop and it's right in front of me and I can't see it. I've spent 5 minutes wandering around everywhere. So I've carved this bird out, and it's got all its feathers there, and I've just spent a little bit of time carving the body. Now this is the macket. This is a bit that I absolutely love. I take this feather, I move it over to the right, and this feather over to the left. You see how they're moving without breaking. It's partly the wood, but actually it's really resilient. But it's also because it's green. If it was dry, the fibres would be snapping. And I can just move them over one at a time. And then this little groove, you may be, pardon me, wandering around there about this. This is the interlock. This is what keeps them all together. So I'll just carry on moving these feathers across. One by one. Okay, right, as I'm doing this, I'll tell you, these are Finnish Russian origin, and there is amazing mythology and folk lore associated with them. Can you imagine up in Finland, up in Russia, up near the Arctic Circle? Your winters, they're long, aren't they? They're long and dark. You don't see the sunlight. And they're cold. It's death. It's everything is completely closed down. And the Finnish, or the peoples of those areas in the pagan times, they believed that your soul was brought to you by a bird. These birds stayed with you as sort of a guardian spirit your whole life. And when you died, it took your soul up to the heavens again. Okay, you can see I've run out of room now, and I love doing this bit of just moving all these feathers up and down like that. So I'm not being that gentle, really. I'm using a little bit of force. Yes, and so these birds played a very, very important part in their in their life. At the end of winter, the coming of spring, the light was returned, and the birds were starting to migrate back. The geese and the ducks were migrating back. And the birds were literally the bringers of life because they'd run out of everything to eat. And so they could kill some birds and continue feeding themselves and their families. So the birds were also the bringers of light as well, of a new season, of a new cycle. And then the sort of Christianity came, and as Christianity often does, it sort of took the culture and sort of twisted it around to their own beliefs. And so these birds, turned into the Holy Spirit birds, doves of peace. And even to this day, and throughout Scandinavia and a lot of parts of Europe, people recognise these birds, and they hung them up in their windows, and they're a talisman, a protection for the family, overlooking the family. And there's all sorts of other mythology or folklore associated with them as well. And the one thing is that they never quite came to England. I'm sure some people made them at times over here, and the only examples English-made fanbirds I've ever seen. And this was at shows. I had people come up to me and go, "Oh my God, I haven't seen this since I was a kid." I was given one by a prisoner of war. They lived in Somerset. There was a prisoner of war camp, and apparently there was a lot of Austrian prisoners over there, prisoners of war. And in those days, prisoners of war were allowed to have a penknife. And they whittled wood, and wood whittling was a major occupation for all sorts of people. And they'd give these little fanbirds and these little fanbird toys to the local kids. And I met someone else who gave me a pecking chicken little game of 4 little chickens on the board with a little bit of string and a ball at the bottom, and you move the board around, the ball would move, and each chicken would sort of peck at the board in turn. And these all had fanbird tails as well, made in the same way. And I've seen other examples up in a museum from the Pinto collection. He was a collector of trees and gave his collection to the Birmingham Museum. And I've seen some fanbirds, and again made by prisoners of war. They're quite crudely, but they're beautiful in their own way and all painted up as well. And I'm just going to force these last couple of feathers in here, and that's about it. Okay. Oh, there we go. And just manipulate it a little bit, and there we go. We have one little fanbird here. Absolutely amazing. I absolutely love them. Okay, just before I close up entirely, I do a bit of teaching in my workshop over in Buckfast today, especially Wednesday afternoons. I'm doing Crux tomorrow at Rattery Village Hall. That's 3 days selling my wares. I'll have a lot more than I have here at Crux. Saturday the 4th, you may have seen in front of you, Ashburton Makers Market, and we're all local people selling our wares just up in the hall, St Andrew's Hall up there. Please do just come along and have a look. It'll be lovely to see you. Also the husbandry school just outside Ashburton. I run a few workshops up there as well, and they do all sorts of land-based and husbandry type workshops if you're interested in that sort of thing. And the last thing I'd like to mention is that if anyone are interested in wood, which I think some of you may be because you're here, the Wood Lab are having a big major open day, a major launch Saturday at Dartington in the Glade and at the Wood Lab. So just go to Dartington. I'm sure it'll be signposted well enough, isn't it? Yeah. Do go along. There are all sorts of events happening throughout the day and probably the evening as well.
Yeah, finish around 9 o'clock.
Right, okay. All free. Go and have a look. It's an amazing project. And some of their things that they're doing there, I am really, really excited about. Very forward-thinking organisation.
Is that the Wood Lab at Earthrights?
Yes. Yeah. Well worth having a look. It will be of great interest to you.
What day was that again?
Saturday. Have a chat with Kez if you want to know a bit more. He's the manager of the Wood Lab there, and it's just what a sod I'm doing Crux that weekend. I would have loved to have been there. So it'll be, I'm going to ask for questions in a minute. So Lucy, if I can have the next slide. Go forth and craft the revolution. Thank you. Is there a question at all?
Okay, so you said you want an axe on this island. What wood? You're allowed one piece of wood. What would it be?
Can you repeat the question loudly?
Right, you want an axe. I can do it.
I'm allowed one axe on my desert island. What piece of wood would I want? Didn't you forget land off the end of wood?
You're right, yeah. Well,
What type of wood? Are you asking what's my favourite wood or what do I like carving?
yes.
It depends on what I'm doing. Woods all have different properties. So if I was making, for example, axe handles, I would like ash. Or if I was in Americas, it would be hickory. If I was wanting to make houses and outdoor stuff, I'd want to use oak or chestnut because it's durable. If I was carving spoons and bowls and treen, I would like to have a birch or walnut or something. It depends exactly. They're all my favourite woods. I cannot say. They all have their particular joys and qualities.
Drift.
Charlie.
Being the true axeman you are, you now and again partake in the occasional bit of axe throwing.
I have been known to, yes. I need to set up a board properly at the workshop and do a bit more. It's great fun. But I tell you what, I'm not using this axe. No way. They're the only axes I'll be using on my splitting axes or cheap rough axes. Yeah.
What make of axe is that?
This is a White House. They're all second-hand, my axes. I love them. Kentish pattern axe. I've adapted it slightly just by grinding it out slightly there so I can choke it right up like that. And so I can easily use it like that. They don't know what makes axes like this anymore. You can only get the second-hand. White House and Son, or Cornelius Whitehouse and Son made lovely axes, as did L. Owell, as did Gilpin and Braids and all sorts of other mates. And there are plenty of groups on Facebook of people who are very obsessive. You've got the Axe Junkies group, you've got the Billhook groups, you've got all sorts of tool groups, and you can ask them anything and they say, oh yes, that tool was made in 1826 by Fred Bloggs in this town using this process. It's all looking through the catalogues and finding out exactly what's what. Yes.
How do you sharpen your axe and your other tools?
How do I sharpen my axe and other tools? I'm sure you'd like to get home tonight. How long have you got?
For £25 you can buy the book of this.
Yeah. It's oh God, simple answer to that question. There's so much involved in it. It is actually very easy, but it is also very complicated and difficult. But it's easy at the same time if you try and get my drift. You've got to use an abrasive to wear away the metal. You've got to wear away the metal for the right bevel grind depending on what you're using the tool for. So if you're using a splitting axe, you want a bevel like that. My fine axes are really acute like that with a convex bevel. I don't hollow grind the bevel, they're not flat bevels. So I use coarse abrasives and I move down to very fine abrasives to create the shape and the profile that I want. And using machines is the quickest way of doing it. Using the machines, you can bring it all just like that through overheating the edge and making the edge soft. Doing it by hand can take forever. Abraham Lincoln once said, if I was to cut down a tree, I'd spend, give me 6 hours, I'd spend the first 4 hours sharpening my axe and the next 2 cutting down the tree. That has always run very odd to me, because he's not starting with an axe, he's starting with a hammer, because he's taking 4 hours to grind it down. Anyone worth their salt wouldn't spend so long sharpening their axe unless it wasn't an axe in the first place, or it had been used for digging stone out of a quarry. But the sentiment of that saying is brilliant. Do your prep, and then everything else will come quick. That's the short answer. I can literally go on for hours about that, but it's all in the book.
It's not by accident.
I have to use that one sometime, yes. Yes.
So when you say chestnut, you mean sweet chestnut?
Sweet chestnut, not horse chestnut. Horse chestnut is difficult wood. It rots very quickly. It tends to warp a lot when drying. It is actually, I did actually a long marsh once. We were doing it was one of the Totnes carnivals or fates, and we're all down there. Bloke with a chainsaw, me with my pole lathe, and recently a big chestnut tree had been cut down, and I carved a big bowl out of it. It was so lovely to carve green, and the finish I could get off it, and the finish that it had, there was a softness and a waxiness to it. It was just a delight, actually. And that was for bowl carving, but using it for fine furniture, it tends to get ignored, although some people do use it. We can use any wood we like for anything. We've just got to know how it dries out, how it warps, what its properties are. With horse chestnut, it's not a desperately strong wood, there can be a brittleness to it as well, so we've got to take that into account as we are building whatever we're building. Is that it?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. It's been
I'd like to just say a huge thank you to Sean and Lucy for keeping the slides going. I should mention on a similar theme, it's not 100% confirmed yet, but you may know that on the Thursday, the 9th of December, is the great extravaganza that is Ashburton's late night Christmas shopping spree. When the road gets closed and stalls sprout up selling all and sundry stuff and food. Anyway, it looks very much like we'll have a demonstration of chainsaw carving of wood outside the front here by Sam Ellis, I think his name is.
Sam, I get those.
One from Crediton, who's coming down. Other half of the arena who teaches flamenco here. So there's flamenco and belly dancing happening outside at 6:30 or so. But before that, during the day, there's going to be some chainsaw carving going on, demonstrating, and he'll have his wares there as well. But nothing quite so delicate and beautiful as this.
Oh, I've seen some chainsaw carvers, and what they do is absolutely incredible.
Actually, he is very good indeed.
And Sean flamenco.
So thank you once again, Sean Hellman.
Thank you.
We come back from Nomadland tomorrow, and the tour is in New York on Saturday. Accent tea and down nighters on Sunday, and the blues on Monday.
Alright, okay. Audrey, you want to walk? Yes.
went to the one that you did with lots of nice
Yeah, that'll be lovely. 21 red door.
No, there's no picture.
Thanks, Sean.
It's nice little flower, but it's actually fine.